We hope you enjoy listening to this podcast of St. Louis on the Air, brought to you by University College at Washington University. With undergraduate and graduate programs, part-time, evening, and online. University College at Washington University, offering world-class education within reach.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Don Marsh. The Shelley versus Kraemer U.S. Supreme Court decision of 70 years ago changed segregated housing practices all over the country. It was a St. Louis case that eliminated restrictive covenants, which prohibited African Americans from living in many neighborhoods. Joining me in studio to talk about the latest episode is We Live Here producer-reporter Tim Lloyd. Tim, welcome.
Oh, hi, Don. Nice to be here again.
You know, I have to tell you, this is one of my favorite episodes because you really brought that important history to life with family members of the family that started it all.
Yeah, I think that, you know, and I know you feel this way too, that you can bring in legal experts, you can bring in historians, whatever, but if there's a certain kind of human truth that is only sort of, or can only really be found by talking with family members who have the story that's passed down from generation to generation. It was a great episode for us. We really enjoyed putting it together.
And passing down that history, they did so in great detail. There are a lot of little aspects of the story that most people probably would never know.
Totally. And I think that aside from just the facts, too, there's a certain kind of, it's hard to put your finger on it when you hear someone, you know, in someone's voice, sort of the emotion and the weight of this story and how it has shaped their family and, of course, shaped the rest of this country.
And how many family members were involved in your conversations?
I think we probably all told talked to, I'm going to say 5, and then we used mainly 2 in this episode.
How did you find them?
That's a good question. So, not to get too deep into the weeds, there's a gentleman by the name of Jeffrey Copeland who wrote a book called Olivia's Story, which is about the Shelley versus Kraemer case and the conspiracy of people sort of behind helping the Shelleys get into that home in the first place and bring that legal fight. At any rate, somebody who we had talked to for a different episode said, you need to talk to Jeff Copeland. He wrote this great book. And we said, okay, great. You know, I just sent him an email. A few weeks pass, and he finally gets back to me, and he says, you know, I'm happy to talk to you, but you need to talk to the family members. And I said, yeah, I need to talk to the family members, totally. And he sort of helped connect me with a woman by the name of Monica Beckham Holmes, which is featured in the show. And she sort of helped me get together the rest of the family. We actually talked to them. They're sort of all over the place, but they were all. There was a group of their family members who were in Dallas for a college graduation, and we just got them into a studio last minute in Dallas and got great stories.
Oh, that's great! I have to mention Jeffrey Copeland has been a guest on this program many
great!
times.
Oh, yeah.
And in our series online on St. Louis history in black and white, we use him to tell the stories.
He's pretty good.
He's excellent. And he's very thorough in the research that he's done.
And I'll tell you what, the family loves him. In a major way, yeah.
Well, he did a very nice job with
the
Olivia story. Well, let's get into some detail here. We'll leave listeners to listen to the podcast to get the part about the Mississippi beginnings of all of this. But they got to St. Louis, and what they found in St. Louis was difficulty finding a place to live.
Difficulty finding a place to live, and also because of segregation, African-American families were clustered in some very limited areas, one of which was sort of downtown St. Louis. They had J.D. and Ethel Shelley, by everyone's account, had very big-hearted people, and they took in kids who needed homes. And so ultimately they had 8 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment, if you can imagine that, in downtown St. Louis. Were both working multiple jobs, had saved up a lot of money, and wanted to buy a home. And they originally actually looked in the Ville, which at the time was set aside just for African-American residents. But they couldn't find anything there. So then they wanted to buy a home just outside the Ville in the greater Ville neighborhood in North St. Louis.
But couldn't because of restrictive covenants.
Absolutely. So there were racially restrictive covenants that said these homes could not be sold to anyone who was not white.
There was a certain amount of desperation, I take it, in getting out of where they were to find a new home, not only because of all the kids, but they weren't received particularly well wherever they lived.
That's true. And it was there was an incident in Mississippi that ultimately spurred their move north, in which a young girl who worked for a white woman was accused of stealing a watch, was beaten by police. J.D. Shelley saw that, helped the young woman out of a ditch where the police had left her body in Mississippi, and said, no, we just can't stay here. And that's what drove them north ultimately. And there was a lot of overcrowding in downtown St. Louis, certainly. And when they found this home, it was really a dream house. And they knew, their family members will tell you, they knew that there was going to be problems. Mm-hmm. They had no idea, of course, at the time that their search for a better home for their family would, make American history.
But there was an incident here.
There was.
Yeah, and we have some sound, I think, to illustrate that.
So this clip that we're going to play is Lawrence C. Riley Jr. and Monica Beckham Holmes talking about a particular incident in which Lawrence's mother, who was the daughter of J.D. and Ethel, was sort of seen as the protector of a lot of these kids. And decided to take it upon herself to defend a young girl in her family. And I don't want to say too much. I want to kind of play the clip and let them tell it in their own words.
I am Monica Beckham Holmes, the great-great-granddaughter. Wasn't it your mom that it was an incident with?
Yeah, it was. It was once again the high-spirited one, right?
Yeah, okay. I'm not to say it like that,
but it's the truth.
I love that we're like the high-spirited one, and I'm like,
yes,
spirited. I think I know what that means.
Yes, you know what that means. The one that doesn't back down. Right?
Yeah. So tell us that story of. I didn't realize that was your mom.
Yeah.
Yes, that was my mom. It actually was a situation where this guy was pretty much being a little more aggressive than he should have been with one of her sisters. It was actually one of her sisters, and then my mom took it upon herself to teach him a lesson.
Handle the situation.
To teach him a lesson.
Let's break this down. How did she teach him a lesson? We're being very polite, high-spirited. Teach him a lesson. Come on, give us the details.
Yeah. Well, it was pretty rough. Mississippi, they were known to carry knives. Now they were known to carry knives. Wow. No, she didn't actually go to the point where she harmed him in that way, but it was just the fact that she had to actually pull a weapon to protect herself and to protect her sister.
To get him off of her.
Right, right.
That weapon stopped it, basically.
Yeah, that made it a situation where they knew it was getting too crowded and the neighborhood was getting a little rough. So they wanted to actually move the family out of there.
They moved into the house on Labadie under the dark of night, almost sneaked into the place.
They did.
And then the court proceedings started.
Right. So long story short, their case wound up in the U.S. Supreme Court, which ultimately ruled that enforcing these racially restrictive covenants is illegal.
Yeah. I think the line used in your piece was, if you can afford to buy, you can afford to own.
Absolutely.
Like that?
That's what it came down to.
Yeah. Well, it was a long, drawn-out process. Did they live happily ever after once all of this was over and done with?
Well, they still endured, of course, a lot of racist intimidation after this court case had been settled. But they are a wonderful family. And I will tell you, I talked to a lot of those family members, and Jeff Copeland, who introduced me to them, would say the same thing. They're just wonderful people. It was a real pleasure to talk with them.
Much more to the story than we were able to tell here, but we want people to listen to the podcast. And where can they get them, Tim?
Anywhere. Anywhere you get your podcast.
All righty. Well, it's certainly worth listening to. I enjoyed it a great deal.
Great.
Another great job. Thanks, Tim Lloyd.
Thank you.
Support for We Live Here comes from Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District. Archive versions of past St. Louis On the Air programs available for download or podcast at stlpublicradio.org/STLOnAir. St. Louis On the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU. Thanks for listening. I'm Don Marsh.
Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.